Welcome to Vape News Radio, the voice of vaping. In each show, we share the latest about regulations and things you need to know, plus upcoming conferences and fests, along with interviews with the movers and shakers in this fabulous vape space. Are you looking to get into this ever-expanding marketplace? Do you want to master this industry? Listen up as Norm Bauer, the Vape Mentor, shares it all. And here's your host, Norm Bauer.
Hello and welcome to Vape Radio, the voice of vaping, and this is show number 80. I'm Norm Bauer with VapeMentors, and I want to remind you that our recently completed program called Vape U3 Vape Shop Master Summit is available, and the price is going to be going up in just a few weeks. Over 4 days, 20 hours, we had 20 instructors giving us some of the most awesome information that you ever wanted to find out. If you have a vape shop, and if you want to be one of the survivors, please join us. We cover marketing, sales, technology, regulation, and much more. It was free to listen to live, but if you missed it, be sure to get it while the price is just $197. That's going to be going up on August 8th. And speaking of August 8th, we are coming up on D-Day, and things are happening everywhere. New products are being launched, and current ones are being redone and redesigned. There's a lot of pieces in motion. There seems to be more engagement with regulators than I have ever seen, and all the advocacy groups are pulling in great support. If you are not yet involved with any of them, I encourage you to do so. And if you're in the e-liquid business, we're opening a new division in VapeMentors called PMTA Advisors to help you with options and choices and give you guidance moving forward. As a matter of fact, that's what prompted today's interview with Derrick Woods with ePure Labs, which I'll get to in just a moment. If you're planning to attend VapeExpo in Amsterdam, I am fortunate and blessed to be speaking there in a few weeks, and then 2 weeks after that, I'll be in Prague. Between those 2 dates, I'm going to be touring as many companies and shops as I can. Would you like to connect? Let me know via norm@vapementors.com. If you heard Vape Radio number 78, we talked about a new movie that's coming out called A Billion Lives. It was premiered overseas and is now coming to the United States and opening in Milwaukee, so stay tuned since it's probably going to be coming to a theater near you. Meanwhile, on to today's show. In the September issue of Vape magazine, I wrote an article on new technology and the flood of new products coming to the market under the deadline. Most think about the hardware market, but this new deadline affects liquids just the same. After 8/8, you cannot make any changes to your product. That means any changes. For those in the liquid market that are doing significant volume, you must be sure that your lab or the one that you are using is set to upgrade to the new requirements. The problem is we don't know exactly what those may be, so most are going to the extreme and are making pharmaceutical grade laboratories. The process of doing that is very costly, and most labs are not going to do it, period. So ePure decided that they were in this game for the long haul and are stepping up and offering other e-liquid companies a great way to keep business going without a lot of upfront fee. After the interview, I'm going to have some closing remarks, but pay attention for the next 30 minutes. I think that you'll find it interesting as we explore what ePure Labs came up with Derrick Woods. Welcome back, everyone, to Vape Radio. This is Norm Bauer, the voice of vaping. We are a few weeks away from, I'm going to call it D-Day, August 8th, 2016. This is the day that the new regulations, the FDA regulations, come into effect. And right now we have a little bit of a chaotic scene out there. A lot of people are scrambling. We have new products who are trying to come to market, both hardware products and liquid. And we have an interesting conversation today with a gentleman by the name of Derrick Woods. And he is the owner of ePure Laboratories. And I'm going to let him tell us a little bit more about himself and why we have him on the show, because he and his company got a little bit ahead of the curve, which I think is really a brilliant idea, because in the world of business, you always want to be a little bit early than be a little bit too late. So Derrick, welcome to Vape Radio.
Well, thanks for having me, Norm.
My pleasure. So tell us a little bit about your company, ePure, and a little bit about yourself and how long you've been in the vaping industry.
Well, about 3.5 years ago, I was driving down the road and I was out of juice. And at that point, the only places I didn't know that vape shops existed, and the only places that you could really find e-liquid were in smoke shops and some C-stores. And so I realized that I was going to have to find a place, and I drove by a company in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Is it okay to say the name of the company?
Absolutely.
Okay. All it said on the wall was Vapor Kings. And I was actually doing business consulting at the time, and I was training in my now director of sales. And I thought, well, I've never seen a vape shop. I don't know that they exist. And I walked into the place just hoping that my instincts were correct. And it was 11:30 in the morning on a Thursday, and they had 9 people working 6 cash registers behind, and they had probably 30 or 40 people in the shop. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. So at the time I was doing business consulting. So my job was to walk in and evaluate a company and say, okay, based on the number of employees, based on the type of industry, the average per ticket, what is this place doing in sales? And it was astronomical and astounding to me. And so in the beginning, it was a twofold benefit for me getting into the industry because I had quit smoking by using vaping, and it was the only way that I was able to do so. And second, it was a great opportunity to get into a budding, burgeoning industry.
Okay, so your first impression of walking into a vape shop was a good one, and good for you that you walked into one that was probably doing it more right than wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so what was it that kind of set something off in your mind that said, okay, there's money to be made here, there's a service to be offered, and you somehow went from where you were to where you are now, which is opening up a very significant and large e-liquid company? Because I always like talking about the transition because everyone gets into vaping in a different way. And usually it's because of something random or because they stop smoking and they're introduced to e-cigs or vaping and what have you. So how did you make the transition from your first introductory aha moment to where you are right now, Derrick?
I left immediately after making my purchase, and I wrote a business plan up that weekend. Did a lot of research on the standard DHgate and Alibaba sites to get pricing and figure out if this was a doable situation. And I was open a month later in my first vape shop. So we were the second vape shop in all of Kansas City. And in that business plan, I talked about how it was going to be necessary to be in manufacturing because I'm a firm believer that if you can have one company buying 1,000 bottles from you, it's better than having one customer coming in and buying one bottle every week or two. So in that business plan, we wrote in that we were sure that eventually this product was going to be a regulated product and we needed to do things in a way that would be conducive to a regulated market. And so from day one, and that's where basically the idea for ePure was born. So we ran the vape shop for a year and ended up opening 3 before we opened the manufacturing. So we started the manufacturing in a modest 6,000 square foot facility. And 2 years later, about 2.5 years later, today we're in a 15,000 square foot facility. We have a PhD level chemist. We've got another chemist that worked for Bayer Pharmaceutical for 30 years. And we feel like we've kind of known that this was coming. I have to admit, though, we had no idea it was going to be as harsh as it is. You know, understanding the benefits in the industry, we understand the benefits of the vaping products for smokers. And a lot of scientists agree and a lot of governments agree. And so it's a shock to us and a shock to everybody at the scorched earth tactics that the FDA is taking. But we believed it was going to be and needed to be a regulated situation. So we're not totally unaware, but yeah, it is still chaotic.
Yeah, and you know what? I think most people who are professionals in the industry were looking forward to some degree of regulation because when you started, which is about the same time that I started, it was a very slipshod type of industry run by a lot of amateurs. And even today, several years later, it's still run by a lot of amateurs. You did something a little bit different than most people. Most people will open up a brick and mortar shop and they'll develop their own line. And they'll do a small little clean room in the back, and maybe it's a legitimate clean room, and maybe it's not. Or they will find a contract manufacturer, which you turned out to be, and they'll have someone else actually just manufacture liquid for them. But you kind of went one step above the supply chain, so to speak, and that was you cut out the middleman. You became the manufacturer. So that was obviously a big step. And if you look at the world today, there's lots of contract manufacturers. Back when I started in 2013, again, if you wanted to start your own line, you had to develop it yourself in your back room, and it was usually done in a very poor way. And there was only a very, very small handful of contract manufacturers, and they really weren't qualified. So let's talk about the regulations, because here we are, and if you're listening to this live, it's just before the August 8th deadline, and if you're listening to it after, then obviously, you know, the die is cast, so to speak, which means that after August 8th, you really don't have the ability to change anything. Otherwise, you're going to be incurring some very, very expensive legal fees in order to go through that process. So the reason I have Derrick on the phone is that I was introduced to them about a year and a half ago, and I had several conversations with them, and they actually created a couple of samples for me for some of my shops. But they came to me and said, what we've done is that we've created a very, very easy way for anyone that has an e-liquid line to be able to get through the PMTA process without a lot of money. So my ears perked up. So Derrick, I'm going to let you kind of talk a little bit about what you think are the deal breakers today. In other words, Joe's e-liquid company out there is getting their e-liquids made by not you, some other manufacturer. So what are the inherent risks that these guys face if they continue to do things as they're doing, understanding that everything's going to change after the 8th of August?
Well, one of the things that we had to study deeply into, and we had to look at the FDA's guidance for small business for standard equivalent application in order to determine what does the FDA consider to be a new product. If it has any of the formulation is different, the ingredients, a different label, a different bottle, and a different size. So I think a lot of people, when they think a new product on the market, well, I'm making a 30 ml bottle of this particular product that we can do any size, any nick strength, any variation therein, and that's just not true. So as of the 8th, if you currently sell your product in a 30 ml bottle, that's all that you're going to be able to sell unless it's introduced into interstate commerce before the 8th.
So pause for a second, because I want to make sure that we make this very, very, very clear. Because the people who are listening right now are going to fall in probably one of two categories. They're either a consumer, and obviously they want choice, or they are in the industry in one way, shape, form, or another. So when the FDA says that you can't make any changes, guys, they mean you can't make any changes. You can't change the label. You can't change the logo. You can't change the fonts. In other words, if you drive that car off the lot and it has all the standard and upgraded equipment, that's it. And so that's why we have a little bit of a rush to market. That's why Derrick is on the phone right now, is because I want to make sure is that all of you folks out there that are listening that are making e-liquid, probably not by yourself, but you're using some type of third party, and no one knows the exact same numbers or the exact numbers, but it's somewhere between 7, 8, 9,000 people. That means potentially if you want to make changes and if you are using a laboratory that is not willing and able to step up and do the right thing, then you are potentially going to be without a manufacturer. I want to make sure that I stress this. And so again, Derrick, what you've done is very innovative. So I want you to go ahead and carry on, but I want to make sure that the people know what the FDA considers to be a change, and it's pretty much anything.
Yeah. And the big issue here is that the industry right now is being driven forward by people who are frantic and understand that they have a limited time and that they're not going to be able to comply. And so it's driving prices down and it's driving sizes up. And so whereas a 30 ml bottle was the industry standard a year ago, right now 60 and 120 mils are where everybody's going. And so if you're not able to get into that market, you're not going to be able to achieve the amount of success that you may be able to if you were in the in crowd, so to speak. So the next step for us when we looked at this, we went to a lot of meetings, we talked to a lot of people. We're in constant communication with a couple of different consulting groups on the PMTA process. And, I think this is a huge area where there is a great amount of lack of understanding is what is the PMTA process? It's a multifaceted, multi-step application process. And it's equivalent to if you're putting a new drug on the market, what are you going to have to do? Well, we're going to have to do clinical trials in humans. We're going to have to accumulate all available data, any study ever done between in the e-liquid market worldwide. Every bit of information has to be accumulated and put together in a format that the FDA accepts. The manufacturing process is going to have to follow CGMP. Those are current good manufacturing practices, which have not technically been written for the tobacco industry. And so the guidelines are very
unclear.
They're very obscure.
Yeah.
But what we're doing is we're using one of the highest levels, which is pharmaceutical. So all of the SOPs that we've written, I hear some consultants saying you need to expect 20 to 25 SOPs. We have about 38 SOPs that we use.
So Derrick, I'm going to jump in again one more time. So again, right now, the FDA says that you need to conform to certain things, but yet they don't exactly tell us within the letter of the law what is we have to comply to. So what Derrick is saying is that most people are going to the very furthest extreme, which is pharmaceutical quality. If you have anyone out there right now that's basically saying that their liquid is FDA certified or FDA approved or FDA anything, they're full of crap, because there is no process that gives you that stamp of approval. It's not like you are organic and you get a USDA stamp of organic product. The FDA is a little bit different. And so a lot of people, Derrick included, they are going to that very extreme and very expensive step and creating a laboratory that for the most part could manufacture cold pills or pneumonia pills or nose drops or anything else like that, because that's the kind of conformity that's going to be required down the road. We think. We don't really know, but you're better off planning for the worst and hoping for the best. Would you agree with that, Derrick?
Absolutely. And I think, for somebody trying to choose a contract packager, the biggest, the largest, most incredible red flag that I see is when I call a company and they say, I have an ISO 7 clean room or an ISO 7 lab, pardon me. When they say they have an ISO 7 lab, there is no such thing that exists as an ISO 7 lab. ISO 7 is an indication of air quality. So that would be a clean room quality. So if they say they have an ISO 7 clean room, that might be true. But if somebody says they have an ISO 7 lab, you're talking to somebody who really is not informed as to what the situation is.
And you bring up a really good point, is that people play with words in life and in business, and certainly in this business as well. And so they kind of think they know the answers, or they think they know the proper nomenclature to use, and then they use it inappropriately. And 80% and 90% of the people don't know the difference. You know the difference. When someone says it's an ISO room, it's really just a measure, as Derrick said, of cleanliness. It's not a certification to speak of. It just means that the lower the number, the cleaner the room, the less particulates in the air, et cetera, et cetera. So, and pardon my interjecting, Derrick, because understand, we are an educational radio show, and the average consumer doesn't know any of these things. And the average person who's in business probably knows a little bit of these things. So I want to make sure that as we get into your business model, people understand why you did what you did, why you're doing what you're doing, and why you are on this radio show, and why I believe in the direction that you're going. So carry on in regards to when people say to you that they have an ISO 7 lab.
Yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is, and a lot of people aren't going to like to hear this, and it might, in some people's minds, might discredit me as far as we do not have a clean room. And I'm not ashamed of that. The FDA, under no circumstances, is going to require a clean room for the production. This is a non-sterile, non-injectable, non-ingested product. And so when you have a clean room, you are literally calling the dogs down on you when the FDA does come in. Everything that we do is in a sterile environment. We validate our cleaning method. We test certain areas. And as you were saying earlier, when you look at the obscurity that the FDA works in, they say, if you look at CFR Part 211, which is the CGMP for pharmaceutical industry, it says in the cleaning area, it says you need to keep your area clean in a way that will maintain the safety of your product and your client base. Well, what does that mean? Well, in order to go through a cleaning validation, that's about a $30,000 to $70,000 process where you are doing microbial, bacterial, viral, all different types of testing through swabbing. You look at your practices. Say you have a piece of equipment that you have to wash. You wash it. You have to validate your washing method, your cleaning method, and make sure that that cleaning method is up to snuff and is actually doing what it is that you expect to do through biological and chemical testing. So when you put yourself in a situation where you're telling the FDA that you have a clean room, well, now you have to follow clean room standards. If you go into a clean room and there is a cardboard box, that is not a clean room. I see these videos of these companies manufacturing stuff and they've got boxes in their clean room. Well, that would not be okay. The FDA would come in and you would get written up and you'd have to remove the boxes from the clean room. And so there's a lot of confusion as to what's going to be required. And what we're doing is we're going to put ourselves in a situation where we're going the road with least resistance. And so our PhD chemist, Matt Plenner, he used to produce nuclear.
Well, let me jump in here if I may, and I just want to interject here if it's okay. So,
no problem.
For those of you who have been listening to the show and who maybe participated in our VapeU program, we have interviewed Azim Chowdhury several times. He is what I consider to be one of the most foremost experts on FDA regulations. He's been in the legal aspects of it since 2009. And he, like everyone else, is surprised that the FDA didn't stipulate certain things that we expected them to stipulate. So again, as Derrick said early on in this conversation, there's a lot of things that are stated. There's a lot of things that are not stated. And there's things that were expected that are not, and there was things that are unexpected that are. So this is why you see this rampant chaos out there that's going on right now, and why you see everyone rushing. Derrick, what I want to do is I want to kind of fast forward from where your history was, and you've done a great job as far as explaining, the scientific reasoning behind it and the regulatory incentives and what have you. But as far as you saw the writing on the wall, as many of us did, and you reacted to it. So you started prepping for this in anticipation of what you would consider to be a worst case scenario, and it is. So let's walk through the process, because what you've done is that you created a vehicle, an avenue for someone who has an e-liquid company to come over to you and basically have, I'm not going to say a guarantee, and I don't know if you will either, but some assurance to know that the process that you are going to be doing is going to give them a very, very strong advantage in the marketplace. But I'd rather you put it into your words, Derrick, as far as what it is that you've created that separates you from the other contract manufacturers out there.
Yeah, and I have to apologize for getting out in the weeds there.
Good, man. It's all good.
We've spent the last couple months talking to people about this stuff every single day, and it has absolutely enveloped the lives of those of us in the industry. And so,
don't apologize for that. I actually commend you for it, because look, we all have our strengths, we all have our weaknesses, and one of my weaknesses is that I don't read legal jargon very well at all. I just don't have the patience or the bandwidth. I'm real good at what I do, and I know what I do well, but when it comes to deciphering what's between the lines and everything else like that, I don't have a good way for it. But you do. You have a team. You have your chemists. So basically, you have dissected these regulations before they came out, the original deemings from 2 years ago, including what came out, the 499 document that came out a few months ago. So now you have, I'm going to call it, a damn good idea of what you think the FDA wants, and it's going to allow you to stay in business for the next several years, hopefully beyond that. So really what you're doing is you are allowing people to join, their cart to your horses so that they can participate in this probably very lucrative ride. So let's go there, Derrick. Let's talk about what you're doing, what you've done, and how other people can, join up with you.
Right. Well, as I started to say earlier, I've done a lot of speaking with consultants who have done a lot of new drug applications and medical device applications, and some PMTA work, as a matter of fact. And, everybody says the same thing, and you hear this as a constant, common theme in the industry, is that we're going to have to work together to get things done. And, that really rang true to me. And so as we were reviewing and scouring this 500 some odd page document, there's a couple of things that we noticed that were very, very important. Number one is that a PMTA can contain multiple flavors, and those flavors will be treated individually. So if we have 50 flavors on a single PMTA, then each flavor will be considered separately.
Yes.
So that allows us to reduce, each separate PMTA is going to have a cost. Right now, let's just estimate for the one flavor, first flavor, you're looking at $1 million.
And that's the number that's get bandied around a lot. Everyone knows it's going to be a very pricey process. Greg Conley with the AVA calls it the millionaire lottery, because each SKU is going to cost about $1 million to get approved.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that in the base file for the PMTA, which is going to be all of the clinical studies, all of the research that's been done, the manufacturing process, those will be the same for all the PMTAs, for all of the products. So by just adding flavors to that PMTA reduces the cost significantly. Another thing that we realized is that they were going to allow, and they do allow, for an argument to be made for bridging. So rather than say we have to do 0, 3, 6, 12, and 18, we can do a 0 and an 18 and make the argument that, and there's no guarantees that they will accept it. However, this is very common in pharmaceutical and all industries, that we can say anything within that range, as long as the highest concentration and lowest concentration are acceptable, that everything within that range should be acceptable. So that's going to help reduce costs. And what we've done is we've said, okay, we're going to go ahead and put up the first few $1 million and have the first flavor in the main PMTA file taken care of. And what we're looking at doing is bringing on companies who can handle the cost per flavor, which is somewhere in the, I'm going to put it in the $350,000 to $400,000 range per flavor. And then what we said was, well, you know what? Since we're already doing the majority of the work in the beginning, if you're doing 50 or 100,000 bottles and you have a limited number of flavors, well, then what we could do to help save you time and money and funding is we'll just tack on a few pennies a bottle. I say a few pennies. Right now we're looking at maybe 52 cents for 2 flavors at 50,000 bottles a month for an 18-month contract.
Right. So basically what you're doing is that you are allowing, Joe's Vapor to amortize the costs as opposed to putting on up front. Because to be honest with you, most people don't have several $100,000 per flavor in order to go through the process. But the short story is, folks, if you're following this, is that if you are already doing some significant volume, and no offense to anyone who's doing less than 10,000 bottles a month, which is going to be unfortunately the majority of liquid manufacturers out there, you're probably not going to be sustainable. Because if you don't have traction now, if you don't have a posture in the marketplace, you're probably not going to be able to. So you might want to think about doing something else, or at least collaborating or partnering up with someone else. So what Derrick is saying is that you already have some significant volume. Rather than you having to go through this very expensive, very onerous process, you'll be able to piggyback on the work that they've already done. Correct?
Absolutely. And for the companies that are doing less, let's just say you're doing 20,000 bottles, you're extremely successful, you have a small operation, but a good solid base of distribution, and you can afford the $350,000 to $400,000 to bring yourself on, then what we would do is, rather than amortize it, we would just work out a fee-based structure in order to add you to a PMTA. We don't want people to think that just because they're not doing 50 or 100,000 bottles, because, it's impossible to say how many companies are going to make it through when this is all done.
This is true.
But when you have a PMTA in, the number of PMTAs that are in, I think we can intelligently assume in the hundreds, not in the thousands.
I agree.
And so when you're looking at the number of products on the market today, me personally, I believe that just to be able to stay on market after August 8th, 2018 for the next 12 months, which is, once you have a PMTA and they've got to look over it, and it's going to take some time to get all this done, and you get to stay on market until that's done, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity in the marketplace at that point, even if it's just for that year, because we can't make any guarantee the FDA is going to accept a PMTA. Anybody who has any knowledge of, a lot of people would say it's foolhardy for somebody in my position to make this claim, but I like for everybody to absolutely be aware of what the risks and what the reality of it is. But out of all the PMTAs that have been put forth in the past, only one has been accepted since 2009, since the Tobacco Family Protection Act was put into play. However, one of the things that you need to demonstrate in a PMTA is that your product is better for society and for your customers and for the users than products currently accepted on the market. And I think that it's a pretty easy argument to make that vaping is better than traditional tobacco cigarettes.
Yes.
So I think we've got a good chance. We obviously believe in it, or we wouldn't be moving forward and putting the amount of money that we're putting into it. And, it gives us an opportunity that, when's the last time that an industry has existed, Norm, where you had a chance to be a groundbreaker, where you had a chance to create an industry and to foment a beneficial product like we have into the marketplace that's going to save lives and create wealth for the people who have put forth the effort and the finances to get it done? It's an extremely interesting situation.
It totally is, and I'll give you an answer to your question. You thought it was rhetorical, but it's not, because I have said this I've said this a lot in my writing and on the radio show. I equate the vaping industry to the automobile industry roughly 100 years ago, the 1910s, 1920s, where anyone could start a car company. They were very unprofessional. The cars were dangerous. They were breaking down. There was no government rules or regulations until finally a certain number of leaders came to the forefront. The Fords, the Oldsmobiles, the different leaders in the industry, the Mercedes, the companies here in the U.S. and the companies overseas. And then as time went on, they created their own standards. They created their own guidelines. And that is exactly what we've done in the vaping industry. And again, in the 3 years that I've been in, it's the most dynamic industry I've ever been involved with. And it's not going away. It's going to go through changes. And so I guess to go ahead and wrap this up, Derrick, what we want people to do. So primarily this conversation is directed to those of you out there who have e-liquid industries that have some type of traction. And we'd like you to consider that you should circumvent some of the very expensive processes that might, overwhelm you or could possibly break you, and have a conversation with Derrick and the people at ePure, and I'll be happy to give you some information on my side. What we are doing here at VapeMentors, my company, I'm actually forming a division called PMTA Advisors. So if you have an e-liquid company and if you are, not quite sure where to go, putting together a little triage between ePure and one of my favorite legal minds and a couple of other people to help people put together a business model that's going to help them continue moving forward in this industry. So Derrick, anything else in the way of closing thoughts?
The consulting company one of the consulting companies that we're working with on creating the PMTAs has cumulative, when you look at all the experience that they have in-house, hundreds of new drug and new medical device applications. So these guys know what they're doing. One of the people involved was a 20-year FDA inspector, a veteran. So, and there's also one area that I think we missed, Norm, if you don't mind me talking about it for just a second. Regardless of the PMTAs, in order to stay on market for the next 2 years, you're going to have to register your flavors somewhere between December and February. It's up in the air depending on the size of the company, and there's a lot of different things that's still evolving. And at that point, the FDA is going to start inspecting. And if you have conditions that they consider to be unsanitary, and what the FDA considers unsanitary and what we consider unsanitary are often very different.
Yep.
And so I think there are a lot of people who think that, you know what, I'm just going to be able to produce for the next 2 years, and then we'll see what happens after that. The problem is, I think a lot of people are in for a rude awakening. And so you may want to consider a reputable contract manufacturer before December or before January, because if your operation is not what the FDA would consider up to snuff, it's something that I think a lot of people aren't thinking about. They just think that they've got the next 2 years. And I think it's going to be a rude awakening for a lot of folks.
Well, I've been actually recommending anyone who has an e-liquid company for quite some time. And because sometimes people come to me and they, I would say probably a third of my business is e-liquid industries. And they ask about whether they should do their own lab or whether they should outsource. And I say, hell, outsource it. Don't even consider doing it yourself, because there's so many things that you don't know what you don't know. And so it's important that you find someone. And here's the reality of the market, guys. A lot of this industry is run by rebels and radicals and rule breakers and people who push way outside the envelope. So you're going to see people continuing to stay in business until the very last moment, until the FDA comes in, and we don't know what kind of regulatory enforcement they have, whether they can tie together with the IRS or with, state lawmakers or what have you. So it's really going to be interesting to see how, in fact, they bring the hammer down. We know that the hammer is down in writing. We know that the rules are in place, but as far as if you break those rules and if you move forward and if you don't follow those rules, we kind of know what the liability is, but we don't quite know how it's going to be enforced logistically and how it's going to be enforced as far as penalties and what have you. So, Derrick, this has been a fascinating conversation. Again, when they came to me a while back, I said, I think this is a great idea. I said, you might be a little bit premature only because I don't know if that sense of urgency is there yet, only because people have a tendency to put their heads in the sand and not pay attention to stuff until it's too late. And I will guarantee you that we're going to see the exact same thing in this industry. We're going to have people waiting until the very 11th hour at the 59th minute, and then suddenly they're going to say, oh, crap, I missed. And, shame on them for not paying attention. But in one sense, it's what the industry needs, and no one wants to see the industry go away. I don't think it's going to go away, but it's certainly going to be a different configuration 12 months, 24 months from now than what it is right now. So, Derrick, on behalf of myself and Vape Radio and our team here at VapeMentors, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, do not go away. We're going to be back in just one moment. If you're a liquid selling or doing some significant volume, contact us here at Vape Radio, and we're going to help you do an analysis of all your options, including moving your production to ePure. send me a note to norm@VapeMentors.com. One more time, don't forget the Vape U3 program, Vape Shop Masterclass Summit, is available for those that plan on being in the business for the long term. 4 days worth of amazing information, over 20 speakers, 20 hours from some of the most brilliant thought leaders in the industry. And that wraps up Vape Radio Show number 80, and thanks for listening. Do you have a topic you'd like to hear, or someone that you'd like us to share, someone you'd like us to speak with? Send us a note to norm@VapeMentors.com. And before we leave, we want to offer you a great opportunity. Would you like to get your product, service, or message in front of our targeted vaping audience? Vape Radio is the #1 vape radio show in the world with more than 1.3 million downloads since 2014. We are one of the top 10 business podcasts of 2015 on Podbean and beat up more than 130,000 other shows. For just $750, you get your company integrated within 3 different vape radio shows, and we're looking for 2 more advertisers to fill our spots. How about you? Contact us here at norm@VapeMentors.com. And now we're done. So until next time, vape on.